Welcome back to Zilog and Moto. In last week's review, I referred to this game as a Nintendo classic. And while Championship Pro-Am didn't come out on the NES, RC Pro-Am did. Yes, Championship Pro-Am is essentially the same game as RC Pro-Am, if you weren't sure about that. There are a few differences that we'll get into, but for the most part, if you're familiar with RC Pro-Am, you'll have an idea of what we're about to get into on the Genesis. The original was a huge success on the NES that was followed up with two sequels, one on the Game Boy and one on the NES. The game was also one of developer Rare's first hits outside the United Kingdom, and put them on the map in a big way, establishing a long-running association with Nintendo that would run until Microsoft bought them in 2002. Now, I'll be honest, before I officially started collecting for the Genesis, I didn't know this game existed. I was familiar with the previous NES and Game Boy titles, even though I'd never played them, just due to seeing them in shops and reading about them in magazines. But this title passed me by. In doing some more research on it, it appears this title was released a full 4 years after the original it was based on. And in looking at it, it appears to be a somewhat cheaply made release, but I'll get into that in a minute. Also, somewhat strangely, I can't really tell who made this game. While the Rare logo is on the back, multiple places make reference to the game being licensed to Tradewest for publishing. This isn't that uncommon, but it makes me wonder if the game wasn't just licensed to Tradewest for publishing, as much as it was licensed to Tradewest for IP development as well. What I mean is I don't think Rare had anything to do with this game, other than license the rights to Tradewest and then make their own game. Anyway, enough about all that. Let's start taking a look at the game. Championship Pro-Am. From looking at the outside here, this copy is in pretty good shape. No issues with the outer plastic layer of the clamshell case, other than a tiny wrinkle in the spine on the front. You can just barely see it there. That's something no one else would really even see. And I actually got a hang tab on this one, which is nice. First one I've seen of those in a while. I need to clean off some of these spots on the top, though, but that's simple enough with just a little bit of alcohol. I really probably should have done that before shooting this video, but oh well. The cover itself is intact as well, and it's pretty colorful. Although I don't recall any nukes in the game, so I'm not sure what's up with that. But I bet this was pretty eye-catching on the shelf back in the day. The Tradewest name is prominent on the cover and then on the spine as well. And we don't see our first mention of Rare until here on the back, towards the bottom. And I've got to be honest, as nice looking as the front was, the back is pretty ugly. It's got all the proper information, logos, UPC symbols, the game name above some screenshots, and the description of the game. But overall, the design is pretty choppy. Just look, these things don't. The spacing between everything is all off, and just look at that. Look at that weird green one-player game stamp. It just seems kind of thrown in there. And it's not very well designed at all. The pictures are good, so they did a good job with these. But other than that, I mean, they definitely they spared plenty of expense on the back, apparently. Opening it up, you see the Championship Pro-Am cartridge. It's in good shape there. And the manual, which isn't perfect. Got a couple bends and stuff in here, but certainly seen a lot worse. As I slide it out, you see this quick start guide for a Super Pad. I don't know what Super Pad is, but I'm guessing it was some third-party controller back in the day. And the previous owner just tucked that card in here for some reason. It's unnecessary, but I think it's cool to have that little extra, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the game. Just a bit of a link to the past. As I open the manual, you'll see that it's not real thick. But that's understandable, being this was originally an NES game. There's not really that much to discuss. However, what is here is described with nice illustrations. And here are all these items you can pick up in the game.
And, there are some decent looking screenshots in here. Not that one, maybe like that one there. And then if I go all the way back, there are a few blank notes pages like you usually would have. But here, I've got this here written in from the previous owner. It's so easy. I wonder if he's talking about the game or the Guns N' Roses song. I guess we'll find out.
As I previously mentioned, Championship Pro-Am is a port of RC Pro-Am from the NES. To give you an example of what the NES version looks like in comparison, what you're seeing right now is the NES version translated onto the Xbox One in Rare's Rare Replay. So it's not exactly how the original NES version looks, but it's close. To give this footage some time to run, I'm going to filibuster for a minute and complain about the title of the game, both the original and the Genesis upgrade. Both games have Pro-Am in the title, which is fine. Having the games named similarly makes it easy to determine that they're related somehow. But have you ever sat down and thought about what the title means? I assumed that Rare just came up with the original title, and since it had RC at the beginning, thought everyone would focus on the remote control aspect of driving cars around a track filled with traps. The Pro-Am part of the title was less important, and the fact that it was somewhat nonsensical didn't matter. But to be technical, a Pro-Am is an event where professionals and amateurs partner up on teams to win a contest. It's most commonly used in golf, but I've seen where it can be applied to charity races as well. I'm assuming that's what Rare was going for originally when they designed the title, and perhaps that sort of thing is more common in the UK. However, how does that apply to this game? All of the cars are the same, and there's not a mix of difficulty levels. Say, first you were to compete in an amateur circuit, and if you win that, you would compete in a pro circuit. So, how is what you're doing in this game a Pro-Am? And the Genesis port makes even less sense. I'm not sure if they had to change the title due to Nintendo licensing shenanigans, or they just wanted to have a slightly different title to illustrate the slight differences, but removing the RC portion from the title now makes it completely meaningless. Championship Pro-Am. Okay, so a championship of an undetermined sporting event that doesn't actually involve pros or amateurs? I'm laying the blame on that one on Tradewest's feet. They got rid of the wrong part of the title. All they had to do was change the name from RC Pro-Am to RC Championship, and bam, you're done. Now you have a new title that fixes the problem with the old one. Normally I would blame a poor localization effort for this, but Rare's from England and Tradewest was from Texas. There's no excuse for anyone not to understand English here. Okay, now that bitching about the title's done, let's switch up. And now you'll see video from the game we're actually reviewing today, Championship Pro-Am. As you can see once the actual race footage kicks in, the game is more or less a straight port of the original game. The graphics have been upgraded a bit, and the ability to track record lap times has been added along with the previous high score table. And finally, the amount of cars during a race has been changed, as the race now features 6 competitors rather than just 4. And that's it. The rest is straight from 1988, unchanged. Just in case you're not familiar with the original, let's go over what the game features. In Championship Pro-Am, you are the driver of a remote-controlled truck racing against 5 other similar remote-controlled trucks on 8 different tracks whose layout will change slightly depending on course condition. The tracks are never-ending, so there is no beating the game. You are simply attempting to set a high score in fastest lap times. For the original title, since it was a simpler time, it makes sense that the game had more of an arcade influence and it only existed for scoring purposes. But really? Tradewest couldn't have added an ending after something like 32 levels, with the option to continue on if you wanted? Or even just an ending at 32, because that would be a Richard Petty-esque effort without a cheat device that very few would see, but still an actual goal to pursue. But no, they took the easy way out and put no effort into that aspect. The reason why making it to level 32, or really any level beyond, say, 12, is so difficult is because of the way you progress to the new levels. To make it from level 1 to level 2, and so on, is by finishing in the top 3 positions, similar to how Super Off-Road is set up. Finish outside the podium on a level, and your score is entered in the high score list, if it's high enough, and you're given 2 chances to continue. Burn those continues, and your day is done, and you must start over again from the beginning. There's no way to earn extra continues, like you can in Super Off-Road, and this seems like a mistake.
Again, it's a play mechanic that somewhat made sense in 1998, but not 1992. Also, I have to call into question adding 2 additional racers and not changing this mechanic, because now you have to finish ahead of at least 3 computer opponents, not just 1. To really support this, the game needed to either be made easier to compensate or to allow the top 4 finishers to move on. But no, the original mechanics remain, adding to the difficulty of an already tough title. This is one of those times where if they were going to do a straight port, they really should have stuck to the original concept. Having the extra racers does make actual play of the game more interesting, but when things are going poorly, it's also that much more frustrating as well. The actual racing is kind of fun, and shows why the game was originally a hit. The game doesn't simply consist of driving RC cars around a track, it also has items for you to pick up and hazards to avoid. On the positive side, you can pick up upgrades for your car that stack up to 4 in tires, handling, turbo, acceleration, and engine speed. Also, you can pick up missiles or bombs to be used against your opponents, adding a bit of action to the game. Although, interestingly enough, opponents don't ever seem to use weapons on you, only you on them. Finally, there is 1 letter on each track that will eventually spell champion, and when this occurs, you will gain a 40k point bonus, and all of the cars on the track will be upgraded to a new vehicle in the next race. There are 3 vehicle classes in the game: the original trucks you start out with, then a more advanced sport truck, and finally a car. One good thing is when you have to use a continue, you don't lose your letter progression, which is nice, but it was also like that in the original game. The graphics of the game aren't really anything special, and there's nothing about them that really says 16-bit, even though by 1992 we were well into the 16-bit era, and most developers were comfortable with developing for the consoles by that time. Looking at the game versus the original, you can tell where the game was ported almost directly to the Genesis, with the game simply featuring a more colorful outlook during the races and status screens, and the extra power of the processor removing the flickering of the vehicles during busy sections. They definitely could have done more here, and the fact that the game looks somewhat similar to RC Pro-Am 2 on the NES, which was released the same year, is not a good thing. Likewise, the sound didn't get much of an upgrade either. The in-game music, what little there is, does sound a bit better, but not by much. And the sound effects themselves are almost exactly the same. The 2 most common effects you'll hear in the game are the tires screeching as you navigate around turns, and the low rumble of the engine. And while the engine noise sounds a little better in this edition, the screeching tires almost sounds as if it's the exact same sound effect. Now, I'm all for faithful ports, whether it's from the arcade to home or from one console to the next. But the only reason for the Genesis version to sound exactly like the inferior original, even though it came out 4 years later, is pure laziness. Finally, let's talk about the actual play as you go around the track, and what makes things so difficult at times. As I stated before, you drive an RC vehicle around a track while competing against 5 other competitors to try to finish 3rd or better to move on. You can upgrade your vehicle based on various bonuses that you pick up on the track, but the bonuses don't really matter, because as your vehicle is upgraded, the opponents are as well. Along with attempting to get around the computer opponents, there are water and oil puddles on the track, along with speed boosts and moving walls. I don't mind any of these, with the exception of the oil puddles, as certain tracks are riddled with them, and if your vehicle hasn't picked up a shield, it's literally like trying to navigate a minefield just to get through them, as hitting an oil patch will send you skidding into a wall and crashing, not just slowing down. Also, you can forget about taking your finger off the accelerator when navigating tricky sections like this, as you will slow down to a stop almost immediately, and the computer opponents will go flying ahead of you, assuming you were ahead of anyone to begin with. I guess figuring out the physics of spinning out into a wall after hitting an oil spill was no big deal, but actual forward momentum without propulsion? Forget about it. To be fair, real RC cars perform somewhat similarly, relying on friction against the track for movement, but I don't think the goal here is realism. You can also pick up bombs to be dropped behind you, or rockets to be shot ahead of you, but only one at a time. Pick up a bomb while you're in last place? Congratulations, it's totally worthless. If you had the ability to keep both at the same time, then I think we're talking about a much better game, similar to Rock and Roll Racing. This would have been an easy fix for the Genesis version, as even the standard Genesis controller has 3 buttons to the NES's 2. But, nope. We're left with a useless third button. This feature alone would have made the game much better than adding 2 more opponents, or even would have leveled the playing field against the additional competitors, because you would have been better equipped to beat them. Overall, there are things about this game which I like, such as the high score list, the trophy room which you place it in races, and the fast lap records, but without any kind of saving mechanism, they're all wiped away each time you restart, giving you nothing to try to surpass on successive play attempts. But making an already difficult game even more difficult, and not really upgrading the game in any significant terms 4 years after the original screams of Trade West trying to make a cheap buck off RC Pro-Am. The game isn't completely abhorrent, and I could see where it might be fun to pass a controller around with friends for a few hours as you try to beat each other's scores. But anything beyond that is not going to keep your interest, and there's just better ways out there to spend your time on the Genesis, such as the aforementioned Super Off-Road. All in all, Championship Pro-Am limps to the finish line with only 2 stars.
Okay, so that was Championship Pro-Am, a game that most have forgotten even existed over the years, including Rare, as RC Pro-Am and RC Pro-Am 2 were included with Rare Replay, amongst certain far more obscure titles, but not this. Unless you're a huge fan of the original and want to give it a look based on that, I can't recommend seeking this one out. It's not a risk-level dismal effort, but I've got to be honest, I did have to seriously consider where it would become only our second 1-star reviewed title so far. Like with anything else in the world, I hate wasted potential, and Championship Pro-Am screams only here to make a buck. As far as next week goes, a few episodes ago I mentioned how when I was researching NHL hockey, I found that there was a separate Europe release of the game called EA Hockey, without the NHL license, and instead featuring various countries' national teams. While the original title was still fresh in my mind, and fingers, I wanted to revisit the game, and see just how different things might have looked if you were playing this on a Mega Drive instead of a Genesis in 1991. And remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.